Rome didn't just build an empire. They built a terrifying machine that steamrolled half the known world and made the rest of it ask for an autograph. Today, we're deep diving into the Roman strategy that conquered half the world, from sneaky war justifications to military tactics so efficient they'd make modern generals jealous, to how they civilized, conquered people until they actually wanted to be Roman. Forget boring textbooks. This is the real and genius playbook of world domination. Let's get into it. The Romans didn't just conquer lands. They ran a systematic, step-by-step empire-building masterclass. It was very important that before Rome threw a punch, they made sure they could pretend it was self-defense, so justifying the war was the first step. Rome never just showed up and said, "Hey, nice city, mind if we take it?" Instead, they were masters at crafting justifications for war that sounded vaguely legitimate. Maybe a neighboring kingdom was being disrespectful. Maybe some rival city-state accidentally crossed an invisible border Rome had redrawn. Or maybe Rome simply woke up and thought, you know what this empire needs? More real estate. Whatever the excuse, they always managed to frame themselves as the reluctant aggressors, the ones simply responding to a grave insult or a security threat. It was like the ancient version of, they started it, Mom, except Mom was the Senate, and the punishment involved legions storming your city. Once Rome had its justification, they moved on to the next natural step, actually winning the war. Once Rome decided you were on the menu, things went south for you real fast. Their legions were basically the Navy SEALs of antiquity, disciplined, brutal, and equipped with tactics that made them nearly unstoppable. They had tight formations, genius commanders, and a fighting spirit that made Spartans look like casual hobbyists. When they fought, they didn't just aim to defeat you, they aimed to make sure no one ever thought about messing with them again. Resistance? Cute. Rome didn't believe in fair fights, they believed in overwhelming force. And when that didn't work, they just kept sending more legions until the enemy was either dead, enslaved, or wondering why they ever thought defying Rome was a good idea. With the war underway, Rome's next step was total military domination, and this is where their machine-like efficiency really kicked in. The Roman army wasn't just a bunch of dudes with swords running into battle screaming. Oh, okay, some of them were, but what really made them terrifying was their organization. The Roman legion was like the ancient world's version of an elite sports team. Romans believed that discipline and role-playing were essential to success and approached military strategy from this perspective. Each soldier, known as a legionary, was highly trained, well-equipped, and most importantly, part of an unbreakable system. Unlike the chaotic war bands of their enemies, Roman soldiers moved in formation, fought in sync, and had the endurance of a marathon runner who also happened to be carrying 80 pounds of gear. These guys weren't just warriors, they were walking tanks with six-pack abs. But the real secret weapon was training. Rome didn't just rely on brute strength. They drilled their troops relentlessly. Every single maneuver, every formation, every battle cry was rehearsed to perfection. This was necessary because during the battles, the soldiers should have understood and carried out orders with ease and familiarity. The Romans were so disciplined, they could build an entire fort in a single night. It's like moving into a new apartment and setting up IKEA furniture before dawn, except instead of a cozy living room, you get an impenetrable military camp. If a group of legionaries got wiped out, no problem. Plug in some new recruits, and they'd perform exactly the same. It was like the McDonald's of military efficiency. No matter where you went, the product was the same. Rome's secret sauce wasn't just their discipline, it was their ability to adapt. Unlike many other civilizations that clung to tradition like it was their last coin in a game of heads or tails, Rome wasn't afraid to borrow ideas from their enemies. Take the phalanx, for example. The Romans originally used this classic Greek battle formation, but after getting smacked around by some hill tribes who didn't play by the phalanx rules, they ditched it for the more flexible maniple system. This allowed their soldiers to fight in smaller, more adaptable units, making them harder to outmaneuver. And let's not forget the sheer logistics behind their war machine. While other armies were struggling to find food, Rome had entire supply chains worked out. They built roads, forts, and supply depots to keep their troops well-fed and well-equipped. If you've ever been stuck in a traffic jam because of road work, just remember, the Romans started it all. But at least their roads lasted 2,000 years, unlike that pothole in front of your house. On the other hand, while Rome wasn't a seafaring power at first, when they realized they needed a navy, they did what they did best. They copied the best and made it even better. They took ship designs from the Carthaginians, added a bit of Roman engineering, and suddenly they had a fleet that could punch above its weight. Kind of like your friend who starts lifting weights for a few months and suddenly thinks they can take on the Rock. So the Roman army was a well-oiled machine that could crush any opposition. But it's not enough to crush your enemies. You got to make them thank you for it. Step 3 in Rome's grand strategy focused on psychological warfare, winning not just battles, but hearts, minds, and terrified obedience. Forcing the enemy to accept the peace terms was where Rome really outplayed everyone. Instead of wiping out every conquered civilization, they often came in with what seemed like a sweet deal. Hey, you fought bravely. We respect that. How about joining Team Rome? It was basically the ancient version of getting an exclusive club membership, except the club owned half the known world and the bouncers carried swords. The perks? Citizenship, eventually, legal protection, access to Rome's vast trade network, and most importantly, not getting annihilated in the next war. This was huge because Roman citizenship wasn't just a passport, it was a golden ticket to an opportunity to be protected by laws and have a chance for social mobility. Of course, there was a catch. There's always a catch. Rome expected absolute loyalty, taxes, military service, you get the picture. Fear was another big part of the Roman strategy. The Romans didn't just fight wars, they fought mind wars. Take the Carthaginians, for example. These guys were Rome's biggest headache for over a century, thanks to those pesky Punic Wars. Hannibal, their leader, even gave the Romans their worst battlefield L at Cannae, taking Rome to the brink of total defeat. But in the end, Rome played the long game. When they finally crushed Carthage in the Third Punic War, they didn't just take their lunch money, they burned the entire city to the ground, slaughtered or enslaved the population, and for the ultimate pettiness power move, supposedly salted the earth so nothing could grow there again. Yes, it was overkill, but it also sent a message. If you challenge Rome, you don't just lose, you cease to be. And then there were the triumphs. Oh boy, did Rome love a good victory lap. Whenever they won a major war, they threw a massive parade that made modern championship celebrations look like awkward office parties. The air was thick with incense, roasted meat, and the sweat of thousands of rowdy Romans chanting their favorite war slogans. The defeated enemies marched through the streets in chains, looking like they'd just had the worst day of their lives because, well, they had. The Roman generals, dressed to the nines in gold and purple, basked in the adoration of the crowd, while the prisoners shuffled along, heads bowed, their defeated kings reduced to the role of tragic props in Rome's latest success story. The people laughed, cheered, and threw whatever was handy, rotten fruit, insults, or both. Even senators, those bastions of Roman stoicism, couldn't help but smirk at the latest addition to Rome's collection of conquered peoples. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a public service announcement. This is what happens when you mess with Rome. But Rome's psychological warfare didn't stop with parades and demolition projects. They made sure that anyone even considering rebellion had a front row seat to the absolute worst case scenario. Crucifixions lined the roads after uprisings, each cross a silent, horrifying reminder of what defying Rome cost. Imagine driving down a highway and seeing billboards that just said, "Rebels get this." Not exactly motivational. If you were a local ruler thinking about getting bold, all you had to do was take a casual stroll outside your city walls and count the number of people who had already made that mistake. Spoiler, it was a lot. Now you might be thinking, all right, so Rome conquered a lot of land, but how did they keep it? Simple. They turned conquered people into Romans. Unlike other empires that ruled through brute force alone, Rome had a way of making their rule feel kind of appealing. Imagine you wake up one morning and suddenly your dusty little village now has paved roads, bathhouses, and an amphitheater where you can watch two guys in metal skirts whack each other with swords. The Romans didn't just take over, they upgraded your lifestyle like an ancient version of a five-star resort, if that resort also came with a healthy dose of taxes and the occasional legion marching through town. First, they built cities modeled after Rome itself, so even if you lived in the far reaches of Gaul, you could still get a taste of that Roman experience. Grand forums where senators in togas debated politics, aqueducts that brought clean water straight to your doorstep, goodbye questionable well water, and markets bursting with olive oil, wine, and probably some guy trying to sell you a counterfeit bust of Julius Caesar. Then they brought in the culture. Latin became the new hot language. If you wanted to get ahead in politics, business, or just not sound like a total barbarian, you learned it. They introduced Roman law, which meant no more local chieftains making up rules on a whim. Instead, you got a well-structured legal system that was shockingly sophisticated, unless you were a gladiator, in which case your legal rights extended to try not to die in the Colosseum. And here's the kicker. Over time, people stopped seeing Rome as some foreign conqueror and started seeing it as home. They adopted Roman dress, Roman customs, and Roman ideals. Want to become a citizen? Serve in the army, pay your taxes, or just be really, really good at sucking up to the emperor. But of course, not everyone was on board. Some people thought they could break up with Rome like it was a bad relationship. Big mistake. Rome had a strict no refund policy when it came to empire building. Just ask the Jewish rebels in 70 AD who thought they could shake off Roman rule only for the Romans to come in, level Jerusalem, and take their temple apart brick by brick like an ancient extreme home makeover. Or take the Britons, who assumed that because they had painted faces and a knack for guerrilla warfare, they could outlast Roman discipline. That didn't pan out. The Romans steamrolled through their rebellion faster than you can say, "Ave Caesar!" This was the Roman conquest playbook. Find a reason for war, or make one up, crush the opposition, offer them a tempting deal, then solidify control, and finally, make the conquered peoples into Romans. It was so effective that Rome went from a scrappy little city on the Tiber to the superpower of the ancient world. And honestly, if world domination were an Olympic sport, Rome would have taken home gold every time. So what was Rome's secret? Simple. They didn't just conquer, they convinced. They didn't just rule, they Romanized. And by the time you realized what had happened, you weren't just living in the empire, you were part of it. Resistance was futile. But hey, at least now you had running water. It wasn't just their armies, their tactics, or their roads. It was their ability to adapt, integrate, and, let's be real, terrify the living daylights out of their enemies. They weren't just conquerors, they were empire builders. And that's why, centuries later, we're still talking about them. Now, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more history that doesn't put you to sleep. Until next time.